Hello, it's Vicar Ezekiel Grabau, and today is Thursday of Lent 2, and we're continuing on with our hymn, My Song is Love Unknown, LSB 430. We're going to take a listen now to stanza 6. The past few stanzas have been reflecting on Jesus' suffering and death in fairly chronological order, so it shouldn't be too surprising to us that we've now moved on to the tomb. And so here we have our first few lines of stanza 6. In life no house, no home, my Lord on earth might have, in death no friendly tomb, but what a stranger gave. Now we take a step backwards, way backwards, before we actually get to the tomb. Crosman points out in the poetry of this hymn that Jesus lived a life of homelessness. We have this in Matthew chapter 8, where Jesus says, "Foxes have holes, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." He lived an itinerant life, going from place to place, staying at his disciples' homes or the homes of people who would take him in, preaching the gospel. He had no home to lay his head. And in death, he didn't have a home either. He had no tomb for him to be placed in, but what a stranger gave. The stranger here, of course, is Joseph of Arimathea, who's recorded in several of the gospel accounts as being the one who took Jesus down from the cross and laid him in a tomb, in his own tomb. And Joseph of Arimathea is a stranger because he's apparently a secret follower of Jesus. Not one of his disciples, not one of those who followed Jesus and listened to all of his teaching, but one who is apparently important among the Pharisees and Sadducees, among the rulers of the Jewish people, religious rulers of the Jewish people, and who secretly wanted to show his devotion to Jesus by burying him. So this was someone who was not known to Jesus, and one who is probably not really well known to the disciples either, because he kept his beliefs about Jesus secret. In fact, it's only the women who even witness Joseph doing this thing. And so we come to this, we have this reality that Jesus lived this life of homelessness, and even in death, he didn't have a grave where he could lay his head, except one that someone could provide for him. And now we come to this second half. Again, I pointed this out pretty early, and it has been true almost every time, but I think this one is very striking in its separation, where the first half is sort of the reality, fact of what happened in Jesus' life, and the second half sort of reflects on it. It takes those slower 4-syllable lines and that different rhyme scheme to sort of reflect inwardly on what this means. And so we hear, "What may I say? Heaven was his home, but mine the tomb wherein he lay." The hymn is inviting us into this confession that our rightful place is in the tomb. Our wages for our sin is death. As Ephesians 2 would put it, we are dead in our trespasses. I remember this. Pastor Newton taught this very well during one of our catechumenate lessons. That's lessons for our new members. He talked about, he had this image on the worksheet of a dead raccoon, roadkill raccoon, and there's a balloon tied to its wrist that says, "Get well soon." And he used that image to talk about how dead in trespasses means that we're incapable of doing anything for our salvation. There's no way for us to get out of our sin because we're dead in them. Roadkill can't move off the road. Roadkill isn't going to get better soon. It can only get worse. And so this hymn is drawing us into that confession that we are dead in our trespasses and the wages of our sin is death. And so our rightful place is in the tomb, not in heaven. That's Jesus' rightful place. As we heard earlier all the way in stanza 2, where Jesus came from his blessed throne. He left his place in heaven for us. But here we have this image of the great exchange. We had this in the previous stanza, and it's all over. And pretty much every stanza of a Lenten hymn draws upon this kind of image. It's just one of the favorites. This great exchange, this idea that what is Jesus's is now ours, because what was ours is taken by Jesus. It's sort of a neat way of explaining what substitutionary atonement really is. That Jesus takes our place. He takes all of the sin, the death, everything that we deserve, and puts it on himself, and then gives us his life, his place in heaven even. And so that's the implication here. If mine is the place of the tomb, and Jesus has taken that from me, if he's taken the place of dying on the cross, dying for my sins, then what place is left for me? Only Jesus' place. Only to live in his kingdom. Only to have eternal life. That's exactly what Jesus has given. And it's such a wonderful, wonderful image for what Jesus' death does for us. Next time, we're going to wrap up My Song is Love Unknown with our very last stanza. God's blessings.